In the previous episode of Mindful Moments, we discussed some signs of an emotionally aggressive relationship. In going over the list from the previous episode, did you identify any behaviors that might be the result of your beliefs? If so, are these beliefs leading you to consequences that you don't want to experience? Some consequences that you don't want might include unhappy relationships with your partner, family members or friends, or difficulties with people at work or at school, or behaviors that may have gotten you into legal troubles. As you examine these beliefs and how they relate to consequences, how many of these beliefs are linked to consequences you've been experiencing in your life? Are there any beliefs that you might be willing to change so that you might get more positive consequences? If you have beliefs that lead you to unproductive consequences, nobody can change those beliefs for you. It's up to you to change those beliefs. Emotional aggression and emotional dysregulation often manifest as emotional chaos. People who have difficulty regulating their own emotions often create emotional chaos around them as a means of distracting themselves from their own inner turmoil. In addiction treatment, this tendency to create emotional chaos can be called drinking at or drugging at someone. People with substance abuse addictions who are in denial about having a problem often can't take personal responsibility for their own addictive behaviors. The reason for this is that if they admitted to being responsible for their addictive patterns or behavior, then they'd have to admit that they have a problem. So instead, they blame others. This means that in their own minds, if they drink or do drugs, it's because of someone else's behavior. A person in such a state of denial will actually provoke arguments with family members and loved ones. When they've provoked such an argument, and then the loved one becomes angry, the person with the addiction has an excuse to go out and use drugs. The excuse is, "You made me angry, so the fact that I got drunk or high is your fault." If we replace drugs or alcohol with a pattern of emotional behavior, we can see how a person in denial about their own emotional dysregulation might provoke others in order to justify their own emotional aggression. Emotional states actually produce neurotransmitters in the brain that mimic the actions of many drugs. It's therefore possible to become addicted to emotional states as well. Such an addiction is called a process addiction because the victim of such an addiction has become addicted to certain patterns of behavior or processes or certain emotional states that generate chemicals in their brains. These chemical transmitters that mimic drugs often produce a high. If you answered yes to more than 5 signs of emotional aggression from the previous episode, look back over your answers and see if any of them involved a pattern of emotional aggression as a way of controlling others. If so, you may be suffering from a process addiction. That is, you may have become addicted to resorting to emotional aggression as a means of coping with life, or as a means of distracting you from your own emotional regulation difficulties. At this point, you may wish to review the mindfulness skills we discussed in previous episodes. Pay particular attention to how these skills might help you to become aware of your emotional states. Would these skills help you to recognize that your emotional states are simply processes of the mind? Would these skills help you to identify any addictive processes that might lead you to emotional aggression? It may be helpful to realize that your thoughts and feelings are like a river. The goal of mindfulness is not to dam up the river and stop its flow. The river is always flowing. Sometimes negative thoughts and feelings float to the top of that river, and sometimes positive thoughts and feelings float to the top of that river. If you find yourself in a period where those negative thoughts and feelings are floating to the top, you have a choice. You don't have to drown in the river. You can choose to get out of the river, sit on the riverbank, and watch it flow by. When you choose to get out of the river, you're not stopping the flow of the river. You're just choosing for a time not to go with the flow if the flow is negative. The choice is always yours and nobody else's. One goal of mindfulness is to realize that we are not our thoughts. We are not our feelings. We are something else. We can choose to identify with our thoughts and feelings, but we can also choose not to identify with negative thoughts and feelings. In doing so, we come to realize that we are not bad people. We're just people who sometimes may have less productive thoughts and feelings. We're not angry people. We're just people who sometimes may let our anger get the better of us. We're not sad or anxious or depressed people. We're just people who sometimes experience sadness, anxiety, or depression. Sometimes emotional aggression is the result of feeling the need to be perfect all of the time. People who have problems with emotional regulation are obviously passionate people. We feel strongly about things and people we believe in. Sometimes that passion can manifest in perfectionism. But what does perfect really mean? Try this sometime. Ask 3 of your closest friends what their idea of the perfect day would be. I'm willing to bet that you'll get 3 different answers. Some people might think that a perfect day would be spent on the beach, while others might think that a perfect day would be spent hiking in the mountains, and others might even consider a day in the library or the bookstore to be a perfect day. The point here is that if different people have different definitions of what perfect is, then there can be no objective definition of perfect. If there's no objective definition to the word, what that means then is that each individual defines perfection for themselves. If you find yourself defining perfect in such a way that perfection becomes impossible to achieve, then you have a choice. You can choose to redefine it in such a way that it becomes possible to achieve. You may also choose not to feel guilty or inadequate if you're unable to meet your own self-defined standards of perfection. The tools and skills of mindfulness help us to understand that we don't have to meet some arbitrary standard of perfection. Mindfulness teaches us self-awareness, and with self-awareness comes the realization that we're perfect just as we are. Until we come to that realization, change is not possible.